Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. This is my third recording, by the way. Something's wrong with my equipment and I just keep getting disconnected, so I'm going to try to make this one quick. But it's hard because this is such a good discovery, and this one's about the Mayan civilization. And there's a new technology called lidar that allows us to see the landscape underneath all the vegetation of the Mayan lowlands. And just to give you guys a sneak peek, this is what it looks like, and there's an ad playing. Anyway, in 1929, you would think in order to map the lowland, like if you knew about the Mayan civilization and you knew that there were ruins underneath the jungles, the smart thing to do would be just to do a flyby and take pictures, right? And that's what happened. In 1929, Charles Lindbergh and his wife, Anne, they flew across the Yucatan Peninsula, and then they snapped photos of the jungles. Like they were flying right above the canopy, and they were taking photos. And she wrote in her journal that unspeakably alone and majestic and desolate, the mark of a great civilization gone. Like she described these large humps of vegetation, and then there'd be stone walls peeking out, and like right angles and obelisks and stuff like that. This is back in 1929. It took them almost 90 years later for them to even replicate something similar. So that was the number one thing that blew my mind. Over almost a generation of people coming and going, they didn't even think to do that again. Either there's someone blocking it, or there's just no funding, or maybe some government red tape or something that prevented that from happening again. I don't know. I guess back then, people in 1929, people who were flying planes, I mean, planes were still relatively new, so I guess there weren't as many regulations as there are now. I don't know. Whatever the story is, it's just a shame that they didn't do it. They didn't take what Charles Lindbergh did seriously and pursue what was out there. But anyway, here's some of the footage, and this is actual lidar collected data that's being run through software. As you can see, there are causeways, there are roads, there are pyramid-shaped structures, there are what look like compartments, and they're built on geographically strategic locations on top of hills and stuff. And then as they zoom out, you can see this is all what they've mapped so far, these little sections, but that's still a lot in Guatemala, and there's still a lot more to explore there. Anyway, 90 years later, surveyors once again took flight over ancient Mayan empire, and they mapped the Guatemalan forest with lasers, which we'll get into more detail later. I'll show you. I'll explain how that works. So what they published in the journal Science were a dozen plots covering 830 square miles, which is larger than the island of Maui, and it's the largest such survey of the Maya region ever. Period. The end. So already they have, in this one survey, they have more information than they've ever gleaned from Mayan civilization ever. So there's some new nuggets of information just waiting to be found and within that data once they start analyzing it more. It's like putting glasses on when your eyesight's blurry, says Mary Jane Acuna, the director of and the author of this entire study. In the past, like just as a quick background information, what they thought were just disconnected city-states, like small city-states in the Maya lowlands, are now probably going to be replaced with the thought that, oh, this is a huge bustling city of millions of people. And it wasn't like this proto-Greek disconnected city-state model that they applied to the Mayans. No, there was actually more than just trade networks. There was a whole cultural network. They knew about the stars, they knew about architecture, they knew about where the best places were to build things based on the geography, and they knew how to survey the land around them. So, I mean, there was a lot more that they knew that we give them credit for. This study shows that the Maya could extensively exploit and manipulate their environment and geography, Acuna said. Mayan agriculture sustained large populations who in turn forged relationships across the region, which makes sense, right? If you're an agriculture-based society and you can support millions of people, then those people aren't just going to keep farming. I mean, they're going to be exploring. You're going to have scientists and creative people among them. They're going to go out and they're going to meet other people, and they just sort of it almost seemed like they were flourishing, because you don't get a population that high without some sort of innovation at your disposal. And they must have had some great medicinal knowledge, because 11 million people, that's a lot of people. Well, we'll get into that number later. So all in all, they tallied 61,480 structures, 60 miles of causeways. I mean, if you look at the LA, the greater Los Angeles area, I mean, that's like there's 60 miles of freeway, like 60 miles plus of freeway. And they had this back then in like almost 2,000 years ago. They had roads, canals that connected cities. So they had advanced knowledge of city planning, large maize farms, houses large and small, and they had defensive fortifications too, which suggested they had some sort of military conflict with some entity in the west of Central America. So like maybe where Nicaragua is and stuff, there was probably another group that saw what was going on in with the Mayans, and they had all this food and resources, and things were going great. Well, with any agricultural society, there's going to be war and conflict, and usually when you see a fortified city, well, it's probably because of agriculture. Like, I mean, agriculture rises and so do fortifications, which is very consistent with what's been going on for so long in history, human history already. So Marcelo Canuto, the lead author, he says, all of us saw things we had walked over and we realized, wow, we totally missed that. Yeah, that's the understatement of the century, right? 60,000 new sites in Guatemala. So you can see this photo here. So there's here's a regular canopy taken from an airplane, right, like a few thousand feet right above the vegetation. And here's the same photo with lidar. And so you can see like this half pyramid here. You can see some of this structure here that's jutting out of the canopy in this picture, and same thing with these two structures. So you would never guess that there was like a full-on complex here with dead reckoning. So this shows like you can see the right angles, the causeways, and the obvious terraces, the terrace landscape. So this is not a natural formation by any means. I mean, there were a lot of people living here, and they knew what they were doing. They knew how to plan a city and how to make civilization run. There's this website called globalexplorer.org, which is like Google Earth, and you guys can go there right now, and you'll probably spend hours and hours there. And basically, it's a database of satellite data that remotely observes sites like in Egypt, Cambodia, and Angkor Wat, and the Amazon and the Mayans. She said that the Parchak, who created the globalexplorer.org, she says that this survey, which she wasn't a part of, is going to upend long-held theories about the ancient Maya society. And she's absolutely right. I mean, what other alternative is there? There's no way it's going to reinforce what we know now, because what we know now is based on such a sliver of information, whereas what has come out now is just huge. So it's like, what we know now about ancient Mayan society has been extrapolated from just a couple of well-known sites, like Tikal is like the main one. That would be like scientists 1,000 years from now going back to the ruins of the U.S. and seeing New York City, what remains of New York City, and extrapolating all of U.S. history, reconstructing what U.S. history just from New York. I mean, that wouldn't work, right? Like, what about Texas? What about the West Coast? What about Ohio? What about all these other places? You know what you guys get where I'm getting at, right? So it's just ridiculous that we're so confident and so brazen with the minimal data that we had before. And to me, there's no excuse, because Charles Lindbergh in 1929 already had some of the evidence that would have been, if you were a scientist back then and you were crazy into the Mayan civilization, you would want to go there and replicate, like do another study doing the same thing. At least I would. The researchers conducted the massive and expensive survey using lidar, or light detection and ranging. So they mapped a bunch of sites, including Tikal. And the way lidar works, it's similar to radar, but instead of radio waves, lidar uses on laser. They use laser light. So basically, they fly a few thousand feet above the canopy, and then going square meter by square meter, they flash, in this case, 15 laser pulses. So those laser pulses, they penetrate anything that is low density, like vegetation and leaves, but once they hit something hard and dense like stone, it bounces back. So because of that, you're able to create an image like I showed you earlier that look almost like CGI. So using lidar, it just completely deletes that layer of vegetation, and you can really get to the ground level of what the size and shape of the landscape is. So beneath the thick jungle, obviously a bunch of ruins appeared. Over 36,700 square miles, which is the entire Maya lowland region. They estimate 2.7 million structures. I mean, I don't think there are that many structures in San Diego alone. So these 2.7 million by the way, made out of stone, these would have supported 7 million to 11 million people during the height of Mayan civilization. I don't know, we did an episode on the Vikings, and the Vikings are about 800, 900 AD, maybe a little bit later than the Mayans. And I don't think even they had 11 million people. So the fact that they sustained between 7 and 11 million people, and they had such a huge advanced knowledge of the skies and city planning and all of and construction, all of these things, it really makes me wonder, like, how did they get that advanced? And it seems to be just them. You know, the Aztecs weren't like this, right? The Incas, as far as I know, weren't this advanced. The only thing I can think of are the Olmecs, who preceded the Mayans, and in their tradition, they came from what we know as Atlantis, like a higher civilization from the remote past. So I don't want to sound all new agey or anything, but I mean, how else could they have gotten the only similar advancements that are to the Mayans are what's in ancient Egypt, like with the pyramids and the Sphinx and stuff like that. So there's a lot of mystery here, and I'm glad that the wheels are in motion to really get this out into the open. Like what Canuto says, we've been working in this area for over 100 years. We didn't have a good appreciation for what was really there. Yeah, because you guys didn't really look. There wasn't a lot. Like there wasn't. I mean, you can only do so much with boots on the ground. But Charles Lindbergh already had it figured out 90 years ago. Like, why didn't anyone take a cue from him? Anyway, Arlen Chase, an archaeologist from UNLV, said for years he has argued that the Maya society was more complex and widely accepted. So back in 98, he and his wife, they found these elaborate agricultural terraces in Belize, but no one believed them. Even they had photos and everything. No one took them seriously. And I don't know how much that has to do with the internet or the lack of internet, but still, I mean, if you're really into Mayan civilization and you're a scholar, wouldn't it make sense for you to get as much information as possible, especially from real scientists who went on a personal trip and did their own private research, and they come back with some evidence? I don't know. I don't know if it's government red tape again or what the holdup was, or people in academia just trying to keep their power or whatever it is. But it's just so refreshing now that we can finally get past all that and just get to the dang evidence. So Chase predicted this paradigm shift, and he now thinks it's going to happen, or he sees it happening. And he says lidar evolved from hush hush military technology, which they used to map battlefields like in Fallujah, like the Fallujah streets, and in the other places in the Iraq war. Kind of like how the internet was a military only technology. After the military used it, it's been obviously it is where it is today. So hopefully lidar follows that same path, but instead of an everyday use, it's used in academic and research purposes like this. So Chase compares it to radiocarbon 14 dating, where radiocarbon dating measures time, lidar measures the sense of space and landscape, and especially in densely forested areas near the equator. Like I said, they did the same thing in Cambodia near Angkor Wat, and they're doing it in Egypt, and they're probably going to do it in the Amazon forest as well, which would be incredible. So here's some more pictures of the terrain data. As you can see, all this is under all the densely forested areas, and you can see the different it's able to map the different elevations, the hills, the flatter landscapes. It's pretty it's a complex visual, but I would say it's pretty accurate. But I think it's best used as a supplement to boots on the ground, quote, ground truthing visits. So what they did was they used the lidar, they mapped a certain area, they picked an area that they thought was worthy of visiting on the ground, and then once they got there, they found those structures that were revealed by lidar, plus a bunch of other stuff. So who knows, what else they can find in there that's probably well preserved, because densely forested and a dense jungle and vegetation, they preserve a lot of stuff. We might find inscriptions, we might find a tablet of some sort, some hieroglyphs, or maybe a sarcophagus, a burial ground. Who knows what we're gonna find, but for sure it's worth looking. It's 100% worth looking, and hopefully they take it seriously, and they literally with the fine-tooth comb go over every nook and cranny. Just 60,000 archaeological sites alone, probably way more than that, because lidar only picks up on the most obvious stuff. This is just very exciting, and I'm sure they got a lot of funding, because you can't ignore the lidar. 60,000 sites, there's so much incentive. So before any research team wants to conduct more research, they got to have an incentive to get in there, and they got to present that data to whoever is funding. And anybody maybe not a venture capitalist, but someone with money, or even the school or the government, if they see this, they can see a huge opportunity to bring prestige to their school. Whatever it is, they're the tip of the spear, and that alone is valuable enough to warrant some resources to get a full-fledged investigation underway. So what do you guys think? Do you think this is a waste of time? Do you think this is obvious to you? Did you guys read about the previous theories and just feel like nothing added up? Because I kind of felt that way. I didn't think that they were just some tribes, like the Yanomami tribe in the Amazon. I don't think it was just a big group of people living like hunter-gatherers like that. On the contrary, I think it was a very stratified and very organized culture that had a lot of knowledge based in science. So, they had their own calendar, for Christ's sake. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.